Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and this is Stitched Up. So I'm back this week feeling a little bit better, I will say. I have, obviously, as you will know if you watched my last vlog, I have been suffering with the dreaded COVID and I'm now 11 days post diagnosis, whatever, and yeah, I am still testing positive, but I am back at work. They've done a risk assessment and everything, which is in line with guidance, and they're allowing me back to work, which is really good because it means I'm earning again, which is always a bonus. And yeah, I've been back at work a couple of days, but I am really suffering with fatigue. I don't know if anybody else can identify with that, but yeah, I am used to being able to live my life at 100 miles an hour, which I'm sure many of you that have watched me for some time already know. And I'm finding it tough, I will say. Yesterday I managed half a day and I had to come home and spend the rest of the afternoon just laid up on the sofa. And then today I've managed a bit longer. I have managed till 3 o'clock today. And I've come home and I've still got some energy, which is great news because I don't like feeling like this at all. And yeah, it's not been a pleasant journey, shall we say. But anyway, things are on the up. Fingers crossed I'm getting better every day and I will soon be back to my normal self. But over last week, obviously, I was at home while I was suffering with COVID and I did get some sewing done and I did get some filming done, which was really good. But I didn't have the energy to film myself, if that makes sense, and tart myself up, etc. So I'm here today with a bit of a pattern review and also a bit of a sew along. So this is what I've made. Now, those of you that watched my last vlog will know that I was planning to make this, which is the Roscoe blouse and dress. I've made the dress version, this version here, which is a pattern by True Bias. It's not a new pattern, but yeah, it's not a pattern that I was ever drawn to in the past, I will say, but I bought this in March. It comes in 3 versions. You can make a blouse, a mini dress or a maxi version, and it's designed as a boho style, very loose fit, balloon sleeved, with a gathered neckline and tie. And if you make the dress version in either length, you get this little sort of, it's not a flounce, it's a gathered bit on the bottom. That's not the official name of it, but I can't remember. It's not coming to my, it's not just not coming to me at the moment. A tier, gathered tier at the bottom. But anyway, and then the blouse version is just sort of a peasant style. It's really, really nice, very, you know, easy, fluid, loose fitting design for easy wearing. Covers up lots of sins, and I have a lot of sins at the moment, shall we say, because as I've mentioned numerous times, I have gained a fair bit of weight over the last year and COVID is not helping at all because I'm not exercising at the moment because I don't have the energy to, but hopefully soon I will be able to again. But at the moment I want to wear loose fit clothing. We've had some really hot sunny days in the UK in the last couple of weeks, and this is the kind of outfit I want to wear. It's not my normal style, I will say that, because I normally like things cinched in at my waist, but then again, when the weather's warm and you're feeling a bit and you just want something loose and, you know, flowy that's not going to cling to you, then I think this is a great pattern. So I decided to have a go at this. Now it does come in, excuse me, I still got a little bit of a cough. It comes in US sizes 0 to 18, which equate to a UK European size 4 to 22. But it does have a lot of ease in it. I went with the straight size US 10, which equates to the UK 14. And Kelly, who is the pattern designer behind the brand, does say that if you are in between sizes, then size down because it's quite, you know, it's got a lot of ease in it. So it's a raglan design and it is designed for flowy fabrics, woven fabrics, obviously. And it's described as a boho inspired garment with a gathered neckline and raglan sleeves, which I've just said. The neckline is finished with a centre slit and neckties, which obviously you can probably just see here. The sleeves are designed to hit a few inches above the wrist, which mine do. There is my wrist. And view A is a blouse, view B is a mini dress or tunic, and view C has hits mid-calf. Views B and C have a large ruffle at the bottom. There you go, it's a ruffle. Fabric choices are lightweight woven fabrics with movement, such as cotton voile, rayon chalice, or is it chalice? I never know. Crepe de sheen, lightweight fabric, lightweight linen and gauze. And on difficulty rating out of 5, it comes up as a 2. And I would probably say that that's probably about right. So measurements wise, it has a chest measurement of a 32 up to a 44.5, but that is your measurements, not the finished garment measurements. The finished garment measurements are a 44-inch chest right up to a 60. God, I can't read it because my eyesight is, it's really bad when your eyesight is that bad that you go hunting for your glasses and then you find them that were literally in front of you. Anyway, here we are. Okay, so finished garment measurements are a 56.5-inch bust. So it has 12 inches of ease in the bust. The waist is really irrelevant, to be honest, because it completely ignores your waist. It's not cinched in at all. And even your hips to a degree. The hip measurements are between a 34 and a 46.5, but the finished measurements are 46 to 48. So yeah, it's, you know, there's a lot of ease in this pattern, and you need round about 3 meters altogether, dependent on the version you're making. Obviously, I've made the mini version, which I'm nearly 50 years old, and minis I thought were in my past, very, very distant past, but no, I decided to go with the mini version. And the reason for that is because as much as I love the blouse, and I will probably make the blouse, but I would always wear it tucked in, I wanted to make a dress because I love wearing dresses, and I had this idea of this sort of boho version dress that I can just wear with sandals, you know, on either during the day or on an evening out with Martin, and or even just meeting up with friends. I thought that would be really nice, but I didn't want to do the maxi version, midi version, whatever it decides it's going to be, because I just feel that on me it would look a bit nightgownish, and I don't think I have the coolness factor to carry that off, if I'm honest. So I made the mini version, and as I say, I went with the straight size 10, which is the US size 10, and I am super, super happy with it. Now, I will say that I hate gathering. It's one of the things I can't stand doing in sewing. We all have those techniques we enjoy and things that we just detest, and gathering is one of those things that I just don't like doing, but I love how gathering looks when it's in the right place. I don't like gathering around my waist because I think it adds inches where I don't really want it, over my stomach, but I do love it around neckline. I love it around wrists in balloon sleeves. I love it on flounces and ruffles. I think it's great, but I hate doing it because it's so time consuming. But anyway, I have done a bit of a sew along, so you know, I will get right into that so you can see how this comes together, and then we'll have a chat at the end about what you think and what I think about this dress. But before we just get into that, I chose a gorgeous viscose. It's like a tile print in red, white and blue. It's a lovely weight. I don't know where I got this from because my memory is totally useless now, and I'm really sorry about that. But yeah, viscose I chose because whenever I make this kind of outfit, anything with sort of balloon sleeves and tiers and ruffles and things, I tend to choose viscose. You could go for something like a cotton lawn, but for me it would just hold too much structure and be too voluminous. So I went with viscose. Super, super great choice. Love this fabric. Think it looks great. So let's get into the sew along, and then I will see you at the end. So we're going to be making the Roscoe blouse by True Bias, and this pattern comes in 3 versions. You can either make the blouse, you can make the mini dress, or you can make the long maxi dress. I'm going to be making the mini version, which is not something that I normally go for, but I just think this will just look too nightgownish on me unless I cinched it into the waist. And yeah, so this is the version that I am going to go for. Now, I've printed out the booklet on my printer because I can do that in Adobe. It just gives me this option, which I think is great. And
I am making the size 10, just the straight size 10. There is a fair bit of ease in this pattern, as you would expect, because of the design. I am using a viscose fabric, which is this one here, and I'm such a terrible vlogger. I cannot remember where I bought this from, but I have 4 meters of this, and I think it's just going to be perfect for this dress. It's absolutely beautiful, as you can see. Really, really, really soft and drapey, and I think as the Roscoe, it's just going to look lovely. Now, dependent on the size that you make, obviously, and the version you make, depends how much fabric you need. As I say, I'm making the size 10. There is 12 inches of ease around the chest, which is absolutely fine because I want it to be really loose and flowy. And the fabric requirements for the size 10 for view B, which is the view I'm making, are 3 meters of fabric. I've got about 4 meters of this, which is going to be plenty. So I have printed out my pattern, stuck all the PDF pieces together, and I have made my adjustments. So there are 9 pattern pieces all together, or that's what you should have when you have everything either traced out or stuck together, dependent on whether you have the paper pattern or the PDF. The first pattern piece you should have is this one, which is the blouse dress front for all views, and you cut one on the fold. Now I have lengthened this by about 1.5 inches at the lengthen and shorten line, but obviously, you know, if you need to shorten it or make any other adjustments, it does have lengthen and shorten lines in it. And as I say, I'm making view B, so it's got a cut line here for view A and B, which is the blouse and the mini dress. I'm not going to cut this because I might want to use this pattern again and I may want to make the longer version at some point in the future, so I'm not going to cut it. I'm just going to fold that up when I put that on my fabric. So that's pattern piece 1. Pattern piece 2 is the back piece, which is for the blouse or the dress. It's the same pattern piece. Again, you cut one on the fold, and again I have lengthened this across the lengthen and shorten line by 1.5 inches to match the front pattern piece. And again, I have not cut off the bottom piece for view B, which is the version I'm making, because I will just fold that pattern piece up. Then pattern piece 3 is the sleeve. Obviously you've got a wide bishop sleeve here. Again, I have lengthened this because I have long arms, and we're going to need 2 of those. Pattern piece 4 is this one, which is the front ruffle for views B and C. We're cutting 1 on the fold. Pattern piece 5 is the back ruffle for view B and C. Cut 1 on the fold. Number 6 is the neck facing for all views. We're going to cut 1 of those. 7 is the necktie for all the views. We're going to cut 2. Pattern piece 8 is the sleeve binding for all views. We're going to cut 2. And then pattern piece 9 is cut on the bias, and we just need 1 of these, and this is for the neck binding. So let's get all these pattern pieces out on my fabric, and then we'll get cutting. One thing I would just want to mention is if you are using a directional print or any print where, you know, you have to think about pattern placement. Now, this is a loose fit dress, as we can see from, you know, the design. It's going to be very loose. As I mentioned, there's 12 inches of ease in the chest, and there's no finished measurement for the hips, so obviously, you know, it's going to be loose around your hips. It's fine. But this fabric, although it's, you know, it's quite a sort of geometric random print, it's not directional, but it does have, you know, it does have lines on it. So I am going to have to sort of be thinking about making sure when I'm cutting out that everything is lining up so that I don't go off grain. So that's something you just might want to think about, dependent on the fabric that you're using. And also, you know, if you're using something like big florals, I mean, this would be great for a big floral because you've got very little seam lines to break up the print. And so it would really showcase a nice big floral print. But you just want to make sure, if you are using something like that, you know, think about your pattern placement, about where the big floral is going to be, you don't want floral boobs. Trust me, you don't want floral boobs. Okay, let's get these pattern pieces on this fabric and cut out.
Right, here we go. So I am firstly laying out the fabric, and as I've just mentioned, it's with a fabric like this, you've got to be really careful that you make sure everything is on grain, and you know, you think about your pattern placement. And I'm just playing about here with the front and back bodice pieces to make sure that everything lines up and the geometric design of this pattern lines up quite well with the front and back bodice piece. So I seem to be quite happy with that there, and I'm just cutting it out and adding the notches, and then we'll move on to the sleeve. This fabric is quite wide. I think it's about 170 centimeters wide, which meant that I could get the front and back bodice pieces by folding the selvages in to the center, which saved a lot of fabric actually. So I'm just placing out the sleeves here, and then the binding pieces, and then there's the ruffle that you can see at the bottom of the picture there. I tend to use a rotary cutter and mat to cut out most of my fabrics. I do sometimes use scissors, but generally I will use a rotary cutter and mat, because I find, especially with these kind of fabrics that are really drapey, that they cut out much neater and you get a much neater finish, because it's easy to distort these fabrics when you are cutting them out with scissors and trying to use pins. So I'm just cutting out the ruffle piece now by making sure that this fabric is lined up correctly. And yeah, there's a front and back ruffle piece which are slightly different sizes, so they're cut out separately, and then we'll be getting ready to start the construction. Right, so now we are just moving on to preparing some of the binding pieces and the front keyhole neckline piece. So as you can see here, I'm using spray starch, and that's because I'm using viscose, and viscose can be very drapey and quite difficult to handle at times dependent on the weight of the fabric that you're using. So I tend to use spray starch, and I pick this up from Home Bargains, which is a discount store in the north of England, and it costs £1 for a can. But any sort of spray starch that you can find in any of your local sort of discount stores, I'm sure will be, you know, absolutely fine. But essentially you spray this on and then you just press it, as you can see that I'm doing here, and then it just stiffens the fabric, so it just makes it easier to handle. And I think when you're creating bias binding for necklines and finishing hemlines, etc., you know, you want to get that really nice neat finish if you can. So just doing this little step here will just help to make sure that I get a really nice neat binding. So I'm just pinning the pattern pieces back on here after I have pressed these, when I've starched them, so that I know which piece belongs to which. These are the two wristbands that go around the wrist of the sleeves, which again I am just spraying here with the spray starch. Really exciting this, isn't it? You can see my gorgeous ironing board cover here, which is flamingos. That's a surprise, isn't it? And yeah, I think most people, when they do these sew-alongs, they have really gorgeous, totally unstained ironing board covers, and mine is rather grim, but then I do use it as an ironing board, and I don't have a nice pretty pastel coloured plain ironing board cover purely reserved for sewing tutorials, so I'm afraid you will have to cope with my utterly well used, very stained flamingo ironing board cover, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. So once that's done and we've got all the prep done, we're going to start work on the front bodice piece. And what we're going to do first is we are going to create the front keyhole detail along the centre front neckline. So what the pattern instructions tell you to do is to find your centre front, which I have found here, and then using the front neckline facing piece, which I've just stay starched, I'm going to match up the notches with the centre front, pin that in place along the top neckline, So we're just going to be putting some pins in all the way through the facing and the front bodice piece here around that neckline area, so that we can create this keyhole detail, and securing this in place with lots of pins so that we know that it's secure and nicely flat. And then what I'm doing now is I am just transferring the stitching line using a friction pen to mark on the facing where I'm going to be stitching to, and then we'll take this to the sewing machine and stitch it down. So here we are at the sewing machine, and I usually stitch my normal stitching on straight seams at a 3mm stitch length, so I am just now stitching the facing to the front bodice, and I'm stitching around the line that I've just drawn on the centre front, pivoting at the bottom and then stitching back up the other side. And then once this is stitched, we will be cutting down in between the two lines of stitching to the bottom. I'm just checking my instructions here, guys, because yeah, and also checking that you can see what I'm doing, because last time I filmed one of these, I think most of the filming was cut off and you couldn't really see what I was doing. So yeah, I am now just taking the pins out, as you can see, and I am cutting through both the facing and the front, and then taking those pins out, and then we're going to be folding the facing through to the other side and pressing, so we'll be doing that in a second. Yeah, here we go, just pulling the facing through. We'll go to the ironing board now, as you can see, and then we're going to be bringing the facing through to the wrong side, as you can see here, and just pressing that down. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be folding under the raw edges, which is hopefully what you'll be able to see me doing here. And then we're going to edge stitch this in place so that it's all nice and neat, and voila, there we go. So now we're attaching the sleeve to the bodice, and I'm doing these wrong sides together because I'm going to be French seaming my bodice. So I'm attaching the sleeves to the front, pinning it in place, and then we are stitching it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to trim that seam down, press it. Here I am trimming it. Then we're going to take it to the sewing machine. No, the ironing board, Rachel. The ironing board, as you can see here. And I'm just going to press those seams that I've just trimmed, and then folding them right sides together, pressing again. Then we're going to take it back to the sewing machine and stitch right sides together, creating that lovely French seam. So here we are back at the sewing machine, and I am just stitching that seam line right sides together, and then we will have created our French seam like so. So now we're back working on the back bodice, and we're attaching the sleeves, the other sides of the sleeves, to the back bodice, pinning in place, as you can see, wrong sides together, and then we will be stitching this in place. Oh, hello. So there we go, we are stitching the wrong sides together on both of the back shoulder seams, and then, as we did with the front shoulder seams, we're going to be trimming that down by half the width, as you can see there. And then I will be taking this back to the sewing machine, the ironing board, which I've already done off camera, and then stitching them right sides together to create the French seams on the back bodice piece. So we're doing well, guys. So now I am turning out the bodice, and we're going to be stitching up the side seam. So I'm just matching up the underarm seam and then the sleeves and then the bodice, wrong sides together of one side seam, and then we're going to be doing the other side, and then we're going to just be doing exactly the same. We are taking this back to the sewing machine, stitching at 1/4 inch, cutting that seam down, and it's starting to look like a top or dress. It's like I'm half dressed here, but you know, last week it was really hot. I was suffering from COVID, and this was one of my moments where actually I didn't feel too bad, but you know, you can forgive me for being half dressed, can't you, when I'm ill and it's really hot? I hope so. But anyway, here we are stitching the side seams together of the bodice, and I'm just trimming the seam line down, and then yeah, we're going to be moving on to the binding next. Exciting stuff. So I'm creating the neckties here, which is essentially bias binding that you stitch together, and I do mine slightly differently because I fold in the ends before I stitch them together, whereas the pattern instructions tell you to stitch them together and then fold the ends over, but I just think that looks a bit messy, so I do mine slightly differently to how it tells you to do it. But yeah, this is where it's really helpful if you've starched your fabric, if you're using something really drapey, because trying to get this fabric to play ball when it's floating around all over the place like, you know, unset jelly is it's just too much for me to deal with when I've got COVID. So did you know I had COVID? Have I mentioned it before? I can't remember if I have, but anyway, yes, I've got COVID when I'm filming this, guys. So anyway, yes, here we are stitching the look at those, don't they look great? Right, so we're back at the sewing machine, and I am using my edge stitching foot here to stitch those neckties together along the edges that we folded over. And I do this, as I say, with an edge stitching foot because you just get a really nice neat finish. So I just wanted to say as well that I'm sorry that I am filming this. Well, I've sped up the film because when I looked at the amount of footage that I had filmed here, it was about 2.5 hours long, and as much as I know you guys all really love this channel, I think that would be, you know, you'd deserve a medal for sitting here for 2.5 hours watching me at a sewing machine. So yeah, so please forgive me for the fact that this is a little bit faster than normal, but you get the idea, hopefully. So now we're going to be working on the neck binding, and for this we're just going to turn over one of the long edges by about 1/2 inch and press it down like so. We're just doing one edge, and then we're going to attach the other edge to the front neckline. Now, as you can see here, I have put some gathering stitches in all the way around the front neckline, and oh boy, I wish this was real life and I wish you could gather up this quick, because boy do I hate gathering. I really hate it because it's boring, it's mind numbing, and trying to get all the gathers even and then them not move and shift about, especially in shifty viscose, is really time consuming. But I've done 2 rows of gathering stitches, and I'm now just working those gathering stitches along the length of the binding, and I'm attaching the binding with right sides together around the neckline, the edge that I haven't pressed. So the pressed edge is at the bottom, and that's not the edge that I am attaching, if that makes sense. And then, oh yeah, look at all this finagling that you have to do to get everything to sit nicely, and it just takes forever. But the results are really worth it. So, you know, I can recommend doing it, but, you know, it's not my favourite job at all. So we're going to get this pinned in place, and the other thing I find is that half the time you do this and then your pins start falling out, and it's just a nightmare. So I don't know if it's just me or if anybody else has this problem as well. Maybe it's just me. Maybe, yeah, maybe it's just me. Anyway. Right, we're back at the sewing machine, and now we're going to attempt to stitch the neck binding onto all those lovely gathers that we've just gathered up. And as I say, this is the bit I hate as well, because the pins end up flicking about all over the place and it's just not much fun. So just getting back to what I'm wearing today, if Nia's watching, Nia said this was my Come On Eileen look, and yeah, I guess it is really, but anyway, here I am half naked doing a sewing tutorial on YouTube with hair that looks bedraggled. And yeah, I tell you that I'm getting a bit sick of these hair extensions as well, because last time I had them done, I know we're going off on a tangent here, guys, but you know, yeah, last time I had them done, I had 3 packs of extensions put in as opposed to 2, and with the heat we've been having recently, it's just too much. I've got so much hair at the moment, I can't cope with it. So I'm thinking about having them removed and just going back to my normal hair for a while, give my head a bit of a break, to be honest. But anyway, back to the sewing. We are stitching the line that I've just said, and then we're going to be folding it over, and then we're folding it to the inside, and then that lovely sort of seam that we've pressed up will be pinning that in place and stitching the rest of the binding in place on the inside. Now the instructions tell you to do this by stitching in the ditch, which is fine on this kind of print because you can't really see it, to be honest, and that is what I did on this dress, but I sort of instantly regretted it when I'd finished, because no matter how much you stitch in the ditch, your stitching always shows. Just trust me on this, it really does. So I think when the next time I do this, or if I'd chosen like a plain fabric or something with a less busy print, I probably would have hand stitched it down, which, yeah, that takes more time, but it's always nice to sit in front of the TV on a night, isn't it? Just doing a bit of hand stitching. I think it's quite relaxing, actually. And yeah, I think you get a much more professional finish if you do that. But for quickness, and on this occasion, it was, it's the first time I've made this pattern. I decided to just go with the flow, so to speak, and stitch in the ditch. And then we've got that done, and there you go. There is one neck binding. So now we're working on the sleeve binding. So essentially we've done the same as we did with the neck binding. I have stitched the short ends together, and then we're just going to fold back one of the edges like this and press in place, and then we're going to be attaching it to the hem of the sleeves. And yeah, making sure not to iron my fingers here, which is always the risk with this kind of thing. And there you go. How lovely do they look? Right, so now we are going to be putting gathering stitches into the hems of both the sleeves, which is what I'm doing here. And ordinarily I just do one row of gathering stitches, but on this occasion I decided to actually follow the instructions properly and do 2 rows of gathering stitches on both of the sleeves. And you know what, I think it works better, because sometimes you can take shortcuts and they work, and sometimes you're just making your life more difficult. And I think, when you're gathering on floaty fabric, if you just try and get away with 1 row of gathering stitches, you're just making more work for yourself, honestly. So I have done 2 rows of gathering stitches here, and what I'm doing then is those little bands that I have just sewn together and pressed, I am doing the same as I did with the neckline. I'm finagling around with all the gathering to try and get these pinned on. And it's even harder doing it on the edges of sleeves because it's a much smaller circumference that you're working with, so more time to get really ratty and start throwing things out the window, but hey ho. Anyway, here we go. We are now stitching the hemband to the hem of the sleeve, to the raw edge, and I'm doing these right sides together. And on this occasion with the sleeves, I did decide that I was going to hand stitch them down on the inside rather than stitching in the ditch, and I'm much happier with how that looks, if I'm honest. So I'm not sure if that's what I'm doing here, to be honest, because quite frankly it's sped up a little too fast for even me to figure out what's going on. But I think oh, here we go. Yeah, I think I've just pinned it in place, and we are stitching it down. So yeah, that seems to be what we're doing. So here I am now, just hand stitching the, oh look, I'm not sure who I'm watching on YouTube actually. Could be anybody, because we can't really see, can we? Does anybody recognise those hands? Anyway, yes, we are hand hemming the binding to the inside of the sleeves, and then once I finished this, I ran out of storage, I'm afraid. So basically the main part of the dress is done once these are sewn in place, and the last bit, oh, I think it's Ruan actually, just getting back to that. Yeah, she's showing a mug there, look. Anyway, yes, I think once I'd done this, I ran out of storage on my phone, and the last bit that we needed to do was to sew the front and back flounce together, ruffle, the bottom ruffle, that's the thing, and then put some gathering stitches in that and attach it to the bottom hem of the dress. And there's not as much sort of gathering in that as you'd expect, but I quite like the effect. It's not heavily gathered, so unfortunately I couldn't film that little bit for you because, as I say, I ran out of storage, and I thought I was filming it. When I came to upload the footage, I realised that I hadn't actually filmed it, but what can I say, I'm a bit of an amateur, aren't I, really? But anyway, yes, the last bit after this is essentially attaching the ruffle to the bottom hem of the dress and then hemming it, which I basically just turned it over by 1/4 of an inch and then another 1/4 of an inch and then edge stitched it in place, and then we have a completed Roscoe dress. Right, so I hope you enjoyed that sew along. I'm really sorry, but towards the end of it, my phone ran out of storage, so I couldn't film the last little bit, adding on the tier at the end and hemming. But you know, it's fairly straightforward, to be honest. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it and managed to sort of get an idea of how this dress comes together. I absolutely love it, and I love it more than I thought I would, to be honest. I think it is super comfy to wear but still looks really stylish. I will insert some pictures because I've taken some in the garden. I have no idea what they look like because I was just stood in the garden snapping away thinking, well, you know, I'm home from work, we'll see how these turn out. But I hope you get an idea. Yes, I totally appreciate that some of you might think that this is probably not the most flattering style on me and my body shape, and I get that. I think there are other styles that suit my body shape much better, but it's not just about how you look, I guess. It's also about how you feel, and I feel great in this kind of design at the moment because I can relax totally. I feel comfortable. I've not got fabric completely clinging to me. So even on those warmer days where, you know, you want to just not, you want to be a little bit covered up, but you don't want fabric sticking to you, this is the kind of perfect garment for me. And I really like it, and I will definitely be making lots more. I've already been looking through my stash, my endless stash, trying to find suitable fabrics for this because I've got lots of 3-meter pieces of viscose fabric that will really suit this pattern. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. And when we talk about figure flattery and designs that flatter our shape, it's a difficult question, isn't it? And it's a really difficult concept. And I do think sometimes it's not just about what other people think you look like in something, it's about how you feel wearing it. And whilst when I look at the images of me in this, I think, yeah, there are designs that make me look so much better, I actually really like wearing this, and that's really important. So yeah, I love it anyway, and I will definitely be making more. Right, I'm going to leave it there, guys, but I hope you've enjoyed this little sew along, and it's really good to be back with you all, and I will hopefully be back with you super soon. So I will see you again really soon. Take care. Bye.